23-24, going once, going twice.
I don't want to just say the same thing you did. That's essentially why we're
gonna
doing
say
this.
it again. Okay.
Why are you saying it?
Shenanigans. Hey everyone, I'm here with my co-host for this auction house draft. This is Joseph. I'm Sabri, and we're creating this video because we've been doing auction style drafts for close to 20 years now, and every year we look out in the internet and we really don't find any information. So we had a conversation and we decided to make a video talking about all the auction draft strategies that we could share with you guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's definitely a shortage of that out there, and typically people just like to throw a bunch of values together based on last year's statistics and just roll it out there, and they tier the values. And there's just so much more to an auction draft than just looking at a cheat sheet and throwing numbers out there.
So Joe, why would you choose auction draft over a snake draft?
Well, one of the things that kind of frustrated me a lot when I was doing snake style drafts with typical rounds and picks was I was seeing a lot of success in my fantasy leagues, and so I tended to be at the tail end of drafts, and I was willing to give up multiple picks sometimes in some years to get at some of those top values, and I was never able to do that. And it really started to frustrate me that I knew going into a draft that if I was drafting 10th or 11th, I had to essentially take the top 10 players off the board, and I wouldn't have any access to them each year. And so I really liked the idea or the notion of the public and the people kind of setting the value of what players would be in an auction style draft, and that I would actually have the opportunity to bid on them. But what drew you in?
No, I agree. I think the biggest thing about an auction style draft is you don't have to wait on a selected number pick that you have. You could do your research, you say, I want this guy, and you could get him. You don't need the number 1 pick, you don't need the number 12 pick. You just want a guy, and you can bid any amount of money, and you go out and get him. The other thing I like about auction style drafts compared to snake style drafts, when you do a snake style draft, the strategy is you research and you pick. And that's it. You might pick a guy a little earlier than normal. You might pick a guy a little later than normal. But that's the strategy. In the auction draft, there's all types of strategy. There is, when do you nominate a player? When do you bid on a player? Do you throw someone out early? And we're going to go into that a little more in detail. But I just love that auction style drafts have more strategy, and you're able to get anybody you want if you're willing to pay the right amount. So one of the first strategies in an auction style draft is doing your research and creating a budget. Joseph, I know you put a lot of time and effort in your strategies and creating the budget. So why don't you tell everyone how you like to go about that?
Well, typically I try to sit down and I try to add some generic values to players, and then what I will do is I will, as my research develops, I re-rank players and I will adjust kind of the budget values that I assign to each player, and then I start to kind of realize maybe more so what type of budget strategy I need to lean into, whether it's something a little bit more top heavy or maybe something more balanced. What about you?
Well, I kind of want to ask you more about that. So when you're going into your values, what makes you decide if you want to go top heavy or something more balanced? What triggers that?
Typically, if I feel that there's someone that's going to be a league winner, or a handful of players that are league winner type players that I know I'm going to have to spend a lot of money on, and then I have a large group of players in the middle that are just kind of fillers, that's usually when I will take more of a top heavy strategy approach, and then just try to fill in with anyone down the list of my rankings.
Do you prefer that strategy compared to others? So the strategy you mentioned is called studs and duds. Typically, when you do that strategy, you're spending most of your money on 3, maybe 4 players, but then at the end of the draft, you're pretty much getting $1 players. Do you prefer that strategy compared to other strategies?
The thing about that strategy that is really important to understand is uh, when you implement it, you're essentially saying that you're committing yourself to constantly monitoring the waiver wire throughout the rest of the season, because that's really where you feel that you're going to find probably some hidden values and ways to improve upon your team when you take that strategic approach during your draft. If you find that there's a large grouping of people or players that you feel you could get a variety of value out of, uh, I might take more of a balanced approach and see what value I can snipe off of those mid tier players and get as much of a collective of them as I can. I know you've used kind of a variety of approaches. I know you're very value focused, so I'm kind of curious what you feel is a little bit better of an approach for your style.
So yeah, you're right. I have used pretty much every auction style draft out there. I've won with pretty much every style draft, and every style has their pros and cons. When you do the studs and duds approach, um, it's great. You're getting these 3 high value players, and they could take you to the championship. But one, you better be right. 2, they better not get hurt. Because as soon as one of those 2 things happens, 1, you were wrong, or 2, they get hurt, and your season's pretty much over. So I tend to go more based on a middle tier or a more value based approach. Um, the thing with that is when you do that, you'll find yourself in the middle of the road. You won't be the best team, but you might be the best prepared team when the playoffs start. So I tend to go to that approach more often than not. I like to have value across the board, but then again, that strategy might not be the best strategy either because you could always miss and injuries happen. But you won't have that one player that carries you, but you'll be carried by, I guess, the group of players on a more balanced team.
I think something important to mention, though, also when you're talking about kind of your budget management strategy, is the amount of player slots that you have to account for as well within the league, and how many players you're actually going to be starting. If you're in a league that tends to have a lot of flex positions, or more players needed, I definitely feel that maybe more of a balanced approach or building some depth can work. But the challenge with that can also be you don't get those those players that can single-handedly win you a week, and you're really dependent on the collective to kind of come through, and you need all of them to come through, and if one doesn't, you kind of get burned.
Well, like any league, I guess the first rule is know the rules of the league, know the
Yeah.
roster, know the depth. So, yeah, I agree. The more flex spots, the more positions, yeah, it's going to change the value, and that's where everyone has to adapt. And I guess that's why we're kind of touching on this. I will say I have looked up on professional sites where they'll do auction drafts, but they're more focused on snake drafts, and their auction drafts will be studs and duds, but everyone's doing the studs and duds approach. So in an auction draft, I feel like that's kind of pointless information because after everyone drafts their 2 to 3 players, you're in a snake draft. And I know we talked about studs and duds, We also talked about more balanced approach, but I think there's a flexible budgeting approach that we need to talk about. And when I bring up flexible budgeting, it's also kind of being a plan A, plan B, plan C type of strategy to your team. And when I say that, I mean having options. If you have a stud and dud approach and you want, for example, Tyreek Hill, but someone else like Joseph wants Tyreek Hill more than me, and he's willing to go higher, and I don't win Tyreek Hill, is my draft out the window? Do I just give up? No, I need a plan B. So let's say I like a lower cost wide receiver. And that receiver, I don't know, let's say it's Jalen Waddle. I like Jalen Waddle. So now I'm switching off this stud and dud approach and I'm going to a more balanced approach. Or maybe I came in and saying, I'm getting all wide receivers. But guess what? The rest of the league said, I want all wide receivers. And you know more than anyone in our league, you come in with a plan and everyone overbids on everyone. Everyone you thought you were going to get, you can't get.
Yeah, I think something important to keep in mind is where flexible budgeting I think really takes off or takes hold is when you tell yourself there are players that you have an interest in, but you set hard caps on yourself not to go beyond a certain point with them, and there are probably a lot of players in most leagues where you set that cap limit for the particular player, but then sometimes there's other players where you want to remove that cap and you say you're willing to spend whatever it takes to get them, but then because of your cap settings kind of what tier then you fall into if and when you win that top guy or you don't win him.
I agree.
You start to see, oh, okay, I'm going to end up with a lot of guys in the middle because I didn't get my top guy that I wanted. But if you get that top guy you wanted, then you start to realize, wait a minute, these guys in the middle are probably going to go for way more because you get the auction inflation starting to set in, and then you realize, okay, these guys aren't of value anymore. People have to overpay on them because we have some inflation going on within the draft. So my sweet spot is going to be deeper with kind of lower value guys to fill out my roster. So you definitely have to go in with somewhat of a flexible budgeting approach, and you can apply that by position, by roster spots, or strictly by kind of player tiers as well.
Yeah, and just like you said, the opposite could happen too. Whereas all the overpaying is top heavy and all the value is in the middle of the draft. So like it said, you could have studs and duds, you could have value, but I think it's important to be prepared where you have multiple strategies so when it doesn't go your way at the beginning, you're not flustered and you go to the next strategy and you moved on. And I can say, at least for myself, multiple times, I've had to adjust and I've still been able to walk away with the championship. So I think it's great to be prepared. And let's move on to hidden cost.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, it tends to be an interesting rule that some auction leagues have out there, is they'll have the auction money tends to be much higher, and whatever goes unspent turns into your waiver money for the upcoming season. I have played in a couple leagues that did it that way. It can change your approach quite a bit if you want to lean heavily on the free agent wires. It could kind of adjust your approach with the draft, and you may find yourself kind of being more in the middle tier, not going after those high value guys at the top. You try to bulk up in the middle, and then hopefully you have enough waiver money left over throughout the season that you can grind some waiver picks out if that's kind of your approach. Or sometimes the studs and duds approach is what happens. They'll say, hey, look, I think I can win a league with these 2, maybe 3 guys. I'm going to save the rest of my money, fill with $1 players the rest of the way, and then I have a nice little chunk budget for free agent moves throughout the year so I can make pivots and adjustments.
That is an interesting concept, and maybe people want to change to that style.
You do the intro, and we'll dive in. And then
He's not sensitive. He's hungry.
And then
Not
yeah,
even
yeah,
hungry.
hungry.
no.
Need to eat.
First of all,
He's tired and hungry. He's hangry. Oh my gosh.
This guy.
Jinx.
First of all, I wasn't even pitching an idea. I just made a comment, and you liked the comment and wanted to do this. So do
Let's
you
go.
want to do this?
I'm here.
All right. then
Let's
act
go.
like you
Let's
wanna
get it
do
done. I got a swollen face and I'm hungry
Dude, a swollen head too.
from all the information in it.
Yeah, well, you don't want to share it.